Okay, so today I'm going to be reviewing module by module the first year of the Counselling Psychology doctoral course that I'm doing at City St George's, which used to be City, University of London. So hi, I'm Marios. I'm a second year trainee counselling psychologist living in London, and on this channel we talk about psychology and anything I think you might find interesting or useful. Stick around if you can, subscribe, like, all the rest, and let's get into it. So what was the first year like? It was a real culture shock, I'll say that. I think going on to a course this intense is bound to kind of come with a lot of emotions, unexpected failures, and just overwhelm to some degree, especially with the placement and amount of work you're expected to do. And the fact that it's self-funded doesn't really help, because you have to also get paid work to support the fact that you're training on a course that you pay for and doing a placement that is unpaid. It's really difficult. But anyway, today we're talking about the modules themselves, what I learned, what was useful, and what you might expect if you wanted to get onto this course and were thinking about it. So one thing to say is these are all my personal opinion. I have raised these with the university to some degree or another, so they are aware. They are also very willing to take feedback in, and they're very active in doing so. So any criticisms or points of improvement are either things that I've already communicated with them, or I believe they're working on. So nothing in here should be any surprise to anyone who works at the university or runs the course, because in some way or another I've communicated it, or our student reps have as well. Also, just to be very clear, I really enjoy my course and I would be applying to City again if I was starting from scratch and had the option to go elsewhere. I genuinely don't believe I would choose anywhere else. So just to be clear, that is my overall position. So I want to feel free to give constructive feedback and stuff like that, stuff that you might experience yourself, just so that you're ready for it. And also one thing, general thing to say before I start talking about the modules, is some points about intensity. So in some ways, it's really intense and something that I've never experienced before, in the sense of the assignments and the way they're marked. In my view, as I experienced them in year one, they are very critical in the sense of the mark itself and whether you pass or not. The comments that they give are very, at least most of them that I received, they're very critical in a good way, because you have to be critical of people's work in order to help them improve, or to just get to the real point of things. You can't just say, oh yeah, this is nice, without being critical. So the feedback I got was good in the sense that I think I understood where I went wrong. For the most part, I didn't need to reset things, so it wasn't like I could act on it, but I did get feedback on what I could do better. I just didn't realize it would go to that degree, that level of scrutiny in terms of the assignments. So the assignment level, very high in my opinion. I like what they're expecting of you. In terms of the teaching, my view is that they did provide you with a baseline, a foundation, groundwork. If you have experience in counseling psychology, clinical psychology, or any kind of psychotherapy or anything like that, a lot of it will be things you already know in first year. So you might feel that the teaching is kind of at a level where they're just trying to raise anyone who's not at that same level as someone who already has experience to get to the same level as everyone else, but they don't really push you beyond that in the first year. So that's just my opinion. But then the assignments, really high expectations. So you might feel that mismatch as well. I certainly did. So that was just a general point. So now we'll just get into the modules. So we'll start with context, diversity, and standards in professional practice. So this was quite a practical course in the sense of trying to understand what it's like to be a practitioner in the UK and what kind of requirements you need to meet in terms of data protection, confidentiality, legal requirements, all that kind of stuff. Just in terms of being a professional, what are the codes of conduct? What are the bodies that accredit you as a counselling psychologist going to expect from you, and how do you meet that standard? So from that perspective, I consider this course a very useful one. It was interesting and diverse in the kind of topics that we covered, and as the title suggests, it did talk about individual differences, different populations, race, minorities, etc. So how that all plays into it as well, and more general practice principles as well. So for me, this was a very enjoyable one to be in. I had a personal experience with the assignment that I guess I was lacking, and it was okay. I passed it, no problem, but it was not what I was expecting in terms of what was required of me, so I was a bit surprised by the grade. So that does bias me. Though I will say I would like to do this course more advanced, so do it again, and maybe that's coming up this year or maybe next year. So I do think this one is a good one. If you do decide to do this course, I would be particularly paying attention to the requirements of the assignment. Keep asking questions, how you're supposed to structure things, how how to support your statements, all that stuff, because it wasn't necessarily the type of setup that I was used to in my previous psychology master's degree, because I kind of knew how to format things there. By the way, that is a theme in the first year that you do kind of have to struggle with a little bit, this change in standards that is expected of you. And so you may be a little bit shaken by the amount of work you have to put in to get, for example, a passing grade, the next grade up, a distinction, etc. But also you start to realize that it's not that important and everyone is having this exact experience anyway. So in this module, as I said, a lot of it is about how to be an ethical practitioner. And as someone who's training, it's really important for you to start to get an idea of what is expected of you in terms of how you keep your paperwork together, how you use supervision and multidisciplinary teams in order to enhance your practice and make you feel supported and do the best job you can for your clients or patients. From that perspective, I thought this was really good to introduce this early on, and I would like to see even more of it, so I hope more is coming. I should really check if that's coming up in year 2 or 3, but I'll let you know. So this one is a good one. Just be careful of the assignment because it's a toughie. Tougher than I expected it to be, let's say. So the assignment for context, diversity and standards in practice was case studies where you had to talk about what you would do in that situation based on the practices and standards that you learnt in the module. So a service user, patient, client, whatever it is in this situation, they're getting worse in these ways, or there's these risk factors, here's the information about their situation, what do you do? And you just have to make an argument within a certain word limit, what guidance you're looking at, what the issues are, and how you're going to apply them to show that you know how to apply ethical practice. And that was the one that I found quite difficult in the sense of I didn't know I had to do so much more to get a better grade than I did, though I did pass. So the second one is cognitive and behavioral approaches to counselling psychology. So I personally do not practice CBT a lot, cognitive behavioural therapy, and it's not a focus of mine, but I will try and be as unbiased as I can about this module. I found this module to be really well taught in the sense that the lecturer was very knowledgeable and she delivered it in a good way. I don't think it was too advanced in the sense that CBT is usually one of the first things that you learn when you're training as a therapist or a counsellor, just because it's quite manualized, or can be, and the principles can be easily understood, I'd say, early on, whereas with psychodynamic, not so much. And CBT has also infiltrated industries like the self-help industry, so to some degree people may already be familiar with CBT from that. I found it was well-rounded in the sense that we've got to talk about, depression, anxiety, panic attacks, and the application of CBT in those, but also the overarching principles of CBT. So I really enjoyed, again, the course itself, the teaching. I did think a lot of it was kind of basic. If you have any introduction to CBT, you might feel the same for a lot of it, but the more specialist lectures on, for example, panic, anxiety, and depression will be more in-depth and more interesting. Now, the assignment was a video recording of you role-playing with a peer, and it was I think the clip was supposed to be 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and no more, and you need to work through a specific problem and show that you can use CBT principles to address an issue. Of course, you can't do that much in that time scale, but just to illustrate that you can use that tool. Now, for this one, even more so than the first module, this one was, in my view, extremely harshly marked. However, the person who ran this module was very knowledgeable. Obviously, a lot of the people who run this course, everyone is really well educated, very skilled, so they are going to be able to really pick things apart to an extreme degree, perhaps. I found that for this one, and full disclosure, I actually failed this one and had to resit it. I found it was quite harsh, but I actually did think that in some ways I did deserve to fail. I could see the argument either way, but I'm glad I failed because failing taught me a lot, and I think that deserves its own video. But failing this one meant that I went to our lecturer and I said, okay, here's the feedback that I read from you. I think I understand it. Is this true? Here's what I took from it. She could see that I really understood it, and she could tell that I had the knowledge actually to pass this assignment. So we had more of a conversation as well as why I might have not done so well in this assignment. And just to tell you what I did wrong in this case, it was actually about phone use. And phone use, if you've seen some of my other videos, is quite a topic close to my heart, and I've struggled with screen time or phone use, smartphone use a lot, and I've tried so many methods to reduce it, and I've found one that works for me now. That was a real journey. So when my partner decided to use that as an example, I think it just triggered a lot of, oh, I had this problem, I have a lot of ideas. And what that meant is I wasn't being curious about how they wanted to solve the problem, and CBT is a lot about using Socratic questioning, so almost coaching answers out of them and then developing a plan from that using CBT principles and then tracking it and seeing if it actually works using experiments, etc. So because I had so much experience personal, and I was bringing bringing that to this conversation, what ended up happening was I was being overly opinionated and bringing a lot of my own stuff into it and not bringing it out of my partner. And that is not the point of CBT. You're not coming in saying, oh, I don't think that will work. Maybe you haven't thought of this, blah, blah, blah. I mean, you should be challenging here and there, but actually I was doing it so much that I was kind of giving the impression that I didn't trust her way of working. And perhaps the things that didn't work for me would work for her. So I shouldn't have been assuming that the things that didn't work for me would not work for her. I should have just allowed that to happen and then said, okay, we'll test it and see next week. And then in principle, if that was a real client, she would come back. And if it didn't work, we'd figure something else out. That's part of the learning process. So I shouldn't have been imposing so much. Now, one other thing, I think this might change with the next years of this assignment. I did bring up with her that I might have picked up on this fact looking at my own recording if there was a reflective piece going with the video. Because a big thing about counselling psychology is sometimes you'll do case studies or submit recordings of your work, and sometimes it can be bad and you're allowed to bring that, and that might be a passing submission, because as long as you criticize and evaluate yourself well, it doesn't mean that everything you submit is like, look, I did a great job here and here and here and here. You might say, no, actually here I really struggled and I learned something, and that's really critical. So for the CBT assignment, hopefully in following years, they will have the reflective piece as part of it, so that I could have done poorly in the recording, and even though I chose it, I would have rewatched it and said, I could have done that better, and then criticized myself, and I may have passed the assignment that way. But that didn't happen this time because there was no reflective piece. For CBT, as I said, it's not a modality I'm likely to focus on a lot. That might change, but at the moment, not so much. And I did enjoy the lectures. The assignment was difficult for the reasons I described. It was a huge learning experience for me, so I'm glad I failed. Also, spoiler alert, even people I really didn't expect to fail had failed an assignment or two, and that's totally normal at this level. And some of them way like more academic, high achieving in that way, distinctions across the board, all that stuff, amazing. I'm not that. And they also had their experiences with failures. So first year really is about learning to fail and being okay with that and using it as a learning experience. It's kind of cliche, but you will absolutely have to learn this in the first year at least. So next is personal and professional development, individual and group processes. So this was a taught module with an essay at the end. I would say this one was a lot more focused on the lectures. The assignment was not that in depth. It was just talking about what it means to be in a group. And so it was kind of a mix between the lectures and then you were part of what was called a PPD group, so personal and professional development. And you would see that group every week for one term. Oh, actually, no, it was 2 terms. And in that it's kind of a weird one. We all were trying to figure it out there and then, but the point was just to be a group and notice what happens in a group, how dynamics work between people. And as trainee counselling psychologists, being able to comment on what it means for someone to challenge you, what it means for someone to speak up more than others, what it means for someone to be quiet, etc., and how the dynamic of the group changes through the terms. And then in the lectures, we just talk about more generally, groups of people might get together for specific situations. They might be grouped together because of who they are, things that they cannot change. There might be combinations of multiple groups, and those dynamics are something that you can study specifically rather than always thinking about people as isolated individuals. So it was an interesting module from that perspective. I would say this one was easier just to breeze through. If you're interested, you can get more into it, but the assignment wasn't that in depth and it was kind of easy to pass, in my opinion. Yeah, kind of an easy one. But if you wanted to take it more seriously, go for it. I'm sure you could take a lot out of it, especially if you want to run groups, like, for alcoholics or addicts of some sort, you may be facilitating a group of people rather than just doing one-on-one therapy. And this type of module would be useful for that. Next is person-centered approaches to counseling psychology. I found this one really interesting. It's a humanistic approach to therapy, and it's very individual growth oriented. It's very much about self-actualization. What are your values? Who do you want to be as a person? What are your ambitions? And kind of how has conditionality in the world, people saying you're good enough if, or people being nice to you if, put blocks on you becoming that person. And therapy being a lot about being compassionate, present with that person, and not putting conditionality on them whilst being in therapy with them, and showing them that actually it's safe for them to open up in ways they might not have felt safe previously. So I really enjoyed this module, and I'm continuing this in the second year as a supervision group supervision, which I'll explain in a different video. But basically we don't do taught ones in the second year. We do supervision groups where we talk about our caseload in reference to the modality that we're talking about. So the first year is more being taught the modalities. So person-centered, I really enjoyed. Again, it's more philosophical, I suppose. It's kind of, I would say person-centered approaches are really good foundations for any kind of psychotherapy, I'd argue. Maybe if you're going deep into psychoanalysis, they have their own particular ways of doing things, but I'd say for the most part, the majority of counselling psychologists will need a good grounding in person-centered psychotherapy and counselling in order to be good practitioners. I personally believe that, because it really allows you to be in touch with process, which is about knowing what's going on for you in the here and now whilst you're with your client, and also trying to track what's going on with them. It's like, oh, so you started talking about this and then we moved on to that, but I noticed there's a shift in you. Do you think that there was a shift there? Or maybe you noticing that initially you're calm, but then you start to get angry, even though what the client is describing is sad. It's like, why am I having sadness? So that would be called countertransference in psychodynamic, but in person-centered, you're kind of tracking how this process is moving and being curious about what it might mean, and then also maybe bringing it to the client, saying, I'm noticing that the process is shifting in this way and that way for you or for me or for both of us, and can we look at that? And also, unconditional positive regard, empathy, and congruence are the three core conditions. There are a few more once you get into it, but to be quick, those are the big ones. Are really good things to think about when you're there and present with the client. Can you be attuned with them empathically? Can you be congruent? That means, can you be aware in yourself of what's happening with you? Could you have the words to describe what's going on internally with you as the therapist? And are you able to communicate that with the client if it's going to help them for you to communicate what's happening for you internally? They also have congruence, so they might be able to describe what's going on for them, but they might not. They might not have the words, they may not be willing to tell you in the here and now, so they might not be congruent yet, but you're working towards developing that. And then you have unconditional positive regard, which is about, not putting conditionality on that person, meaning you don't treat them with the empathy and the presence and all the good things that you bring as a therapist only when they're being a good client or when they're calm. You're there with them with whatever they bring. It could be hateful, it could be angry, it could be violent, of course not violent physically towards you, but they could bring intense feelings, and for you to be there unconditionally and to give them positive regard doesn't mean you approve everything that they're doing. It doesn't mean that you say, yes, you're right to go and beat up that person. That's not what positive regard is about, but it is about, I'm going to still be here and I still value you and I still think that you're worthy of being here and of healing through this journey, including this, whatever's going on here that might not be ideal. So it's I found it a really interesting one and a really solid foundation for someone training at this level. The assignment was a series of weekly reflections. So what we did was write about what we thought we learned from the previous week of our lecture, and then we sent it to a peer. The peer gave their comments back about our reflection on what we learned, and we would comment on theirs as well. So everyone got to swap their papers basically. And then at the end, you submit the collection of those, your weekly learnings, and then you comment more generally what it is about this approach that resonates with you or doesn't, and whether you continue this way or not. And so it was quite a nice one because you got a lot of flexibility, and I thought this one was really useful. I like that it got us reflecting constantly on what we were learning. I think that was good to really ingrain what was going on. And then the final reflective piece on what would I take from this? What is actually useful? How am I going to incorporate it into my practice? Again, really good way of integrating the learning. I thought it was all explained well, so I liked this one. So the next one is psychodynamic approaches to counselling psychology. This is a modality that I'm personally interested in, so I might be biased here. I'm biased with all of it, obviously, but I really enjoyed this module. The lecturer is really great. She's just across the board. It was really delivered in an excellent way. Very interesting, in-depth as well, challenging throughout. I really felt like I needed to keep up, and I felt like I fell behind in a lot of it, and sometimes I felt completely lost. I didn't know what really we were talking about. But the reading, it's challenging, and it's a challenging topic, psychodynamic and psychoanalysis. So that is expected, and we were kind of warned about that as well. But I enjoyed it so much. It was so interesting, and it's such a foundational, at least in terms of the origins of psychotherapy. It is, the source of all of that. And personal opinion, but I think it is also really the source of all existing psychotherapies. They all kind of just hone in on one area, but psychodynamic brought all of it together and, has a particular way of working. But if you trace back each of the modalities that are popular now, you can see that they originated from psychodynamic. In some ways they had to, but I think it's really crucial to understand those fundamentals in order to understand where our whole field came from. So I thought it was a really great module. You learn about defenses, projection, introjection, denial, all those kinds of stuff that you might think it's so embedded in our lexicon now that you think it's just a common thing that people know about. But no, it came from this approach and it's studied extensively. So the idea is people's unconscious lives are driving their conscious behavior, but that may be happening in a way that is not doing good things in their life. So once you start to make those unconscious drives conscious, you can start to make more conscious decisions because you're not having this automated thing in the background driving you through fear or shame or whatever it is, because you're starting to be more, I know where this comes from. I know what this feeling is. I know it always reminded me of that part of my life, and now, and because I've worked on that and resolved it, I can start to make more conscious choices with my life now. In simple terms, that's kind of what's happening. And also a focus on transference and countertransference. Transference being the feelings that the patient has towards you, and countertransference being the feelings that the therapist has towards the patient in the session. So it's very in the here and now in that sense, trying to understand what that dynamic is telling us about those unconscious drives and the defenses, because they will play out in the room as well. So it's really, it's such a deep and rich body of knowledge, and it can be applied to so many things. But in terms of just therapy, I think it is just, it's crucial to know. And some clinical psychology courses don't teach psychodynamic to much of a sensible level. And I think that is a real shame for the trainees, for sure. I don't think it's possible really to be a well-rounded therapist without having a solid understanding of psychodynamics, psychotherapy, and psychoanalysis to some degree too. The assignment was writing a case formulation using the psychodynamic approach. So you pick one of your patients and you anonymize the information, but you analyze it using concepts from psychodynamic, and it has a particular way of looking at, as I said, the unconscious, conscious, and also developmentally, was their parenting, how did their parenting impact the way they look at the world now and how they look at themselves, and how is that playing out in their current life. So all around, I'd say this is my favorite module from year one, absolutely, but it might be because of my fondness for the approach. So research methods 1 and 2, I'll speak about them together. Research methods 1 was term 1 and research methods 2 was term 2, I think. And so I'll speak about them together. I think the research methods modules were extensive in the sense that we kind of covered lots, but really quickly. Some things we talked about a lot more than others, particularly qualitative approaches. So IPA, thematic analysis, that kind of stuff. I feel like we probably could have moved on quicker from those ones, because I feel like those were repeated a couple of times. And in some other ways, we rushed through things that I thought we should have done in more depth. Specifically, statistical methods. I think that's like a critical one, unless you're doing qualitative and not doing any statistics at all. But to be a well-rounded psychologist, and certainly in clinical, you do a lot more of that, a lot more of the statistical, quantitative. So I think for balance, we should have done more of that. I don't believe we did. And yeah, I wish these modules had more of a practical element. What I mean by that is I would love to have every week started with a idea for a study. Like, we want to look at eating disorders in this population and see if an intervention changes whatever. Now, if we did that and then said, how do we design this study? That would be so much more practical to learn that, because we'd say, we need it to be qualitative, we need it to be quantitative, or we need a mix. Why? And even being able to justify that and apply that. But I feel like it was just kind of, all the information was just kind of thrown on us, and it was kind of quick in a lot of parts and then long in parts that didn't need to be too long. So I thought pace was not really well done. But overall, I think, okay, it did prepare me for my thesis, which is the main point of it. I got to understand the concepts I needed to in order to get ready to design my study. I'm not sure which way around it is, but one of the assignments is a literature review. So you have your question and you say, what existing literature is out there, and evaluate it via a literature review. So I found this exercise really useful, because you start to know, hey, what answers are still required for the thing that you're studying, or what has already been answered. And then that will help you shape your research question, of course. So that was very useful. So I'd say the assignment, really useful, understood how to do it, and it was marked I think it was marked reasonably, or at least I understood how they were going to look at that. And the other one, so I think it was Research Methods 2, was a research proposal. So it was a short version of what your thesis is going to be, and just thinking about beginning to end what your philosophical position is in terms of epistemology, ontology, and your positionings there. So how are you thinking about the way you construct knowledge, and how are you going to design a study that fits that, or the other way around, it needs to be a certain method, therefore what kind of theoretical frameworks will you be using to analyze what you gather. I guess that was a good thing from this module, is that I started to understand that process of thinking about the philosophy of research and the method of research and how those relate to each other. Again, I wish we'd done it in a more practical way, because even now I'm still learning. It's not an easy thing for me to bring to mind, to be honest. So yeah, I think in the end it got me where I needed to be, but I would have chosen other things to be at the forefront when it comes to the lectures and the pace of the lectures. And then finally, there's the professional development and supervision module. This is not a taught module, but basically, because you do supervision throughout your placement placement, you're now expected to, well, have engaged in the supervision properly, of course, in the modality that you're working in. I was mostly working in a person-centered way because you can't do psychodynamic generally in the first year. Some people can if they get the right placement, but I was doing person-centered. And then you write a process report. So a process report is a short recording of some work you did with a client, and you got the permission to record that session and use it for your training as part of your training. So you get that all signed off from them. And then you write a report about what was happening throughout this. You basically create a transcript and you comment, here, I think I was doing this. Here, I think I missed what I should have done. It was an opportunity to do this, but I didn't. I think the client here was opening up, or I think the client here was pulling away. And maybe the reason for that is this and that, and how you incorporate theory of what you've learned about that approach into that work. So that's what a process report is. And process reports are really important for this kind of work because it shows that you're a reflective practitioner, that you're able to apply what you learn, and that you're thinking about your practice through what you learn. Now, in the there and now, like when you're actually with the client, you're not really thinking about, oh, what theory am I going to apply? What am I doing now? It's like, not most of the time you're not thinking about that. But as a practitioner, you should think, okay, you should be able to say, oh, I realize I talk too much with clients. I think I need to be more okay with silence. Allow more time, allow more pauses. That's a critical thing to learn. I learned that for myself as well. And just showing that you can do that. So that, I think that was the big point for this assessment. So I think that's everything. There might be other ones that are not taught, but they're kind of making sure you reach all the right checkpoints, reviews for your placement, that kind of stuff. They don't really count because they're not taught, and you have to do them anyway after doing your placement. So I won't review them. To me, I'm not sure what I would talk about. It's a practical placement, but if it's not cleared, let me know exactly what's not clear, what you need to learn, and I can make another video about it. And generally, if you have any more questions, leave them in the comment box below, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers, look after yourself.